Hello, and welcome to Tabor Institute's webinar, Risk Planning, Mitigation, and Response. My name is Michael Trumper. I'm one of the principals here at Tabor Institute. I've been here for almost 20 years and am the normal presenter at these webinars. Before we get started, we'll quickly go over how we can interact through the webinar. So you should be seeing a panel up at the top right. You can choose how your audio that you're going to use. Again, we always recommend using the computer audio as it tends to be of higher quality. There is a questions pane. Now, we're not going to be answering questions other than ones that have of a technical nature. You can't hear or there's something wrong with the feed. If you do have questions, once they come in, we will answer them at the end of the webinar in the order that they came in. So, just to give some definitions and how our definitions of these mitigation and response. So, mitigation is an activity or set of activities to minimize the impact of a risk or chain of risks on a project objective. Mitigation requires the expenditure of both time and money and is a cost benefit analysis. One of the things that we do talk about in the some of our presentations, the idea of zero risk bias. If we're not avoiding or transferring a risk and we're going to mitigate it, that doesn't mean we're going to eliminate the risk. There is going to be obviously a cost or schedule impacts or both on your project objectives. And what we're going to try and do is buy them down. And that means we're going to try and minimize the impact by spending time and money. And it is, again, a cost benefit analysis. How much money and time can we spend to bring down a risk? And at some point, that could go into the negative. So we'll take a look at the cost of risk capability that we have in the system. And response plan. Now, response plan is not a new feature, but we'll bring it in because it is part of this work. It can be part of the workflow, and it's an activity or a set of activities to recover from an impact of a risk or a chain of risk. So, if a risk does occur, might have to do certain activities, which include, again, time and cost. Can be used to response plan can be used as a single impact on many activities or one activity to document the impact of the risks and to broadcast that plan to multiple activities. So when we look at this mitigation response, this is just two little charts about how we might visualize it. In the pre-mitigation, we have a cost and schedule, and we have the original. We can see that as a dotted line, and that's our original plan. But if a risk event occurs at a certain point, it's going to have an impact, and that's going to shift the plan, and it's going to add more cost and schedule, and then we can see that the result of those risk events occurring if they're not mitigated. Now, in the post-mitigation, it's a little bit more busy, but what we see is that we're going to do some mitigation efforts before the risk occurs, and that's going to slightly shift that project plan up from the baseline, meaning that you can see from the curve on that, and that when that risk event occurs, what we see is there's still an impact, but it's a lot less dramatic. So we've minimized it, and that can, in that place, that period when we're recovering and getting back on schedule can be where the response is taking place, and that could be that uh, activities that you're doing to recover from that, and that you get into that post mitigated. And at the end, we go to you can see that there are some savings or benefit from doing both that mitigation and that response plan. So this is a little bit of diagramming the relationships that we have in the system. There's something called the cost of risk calculation that's in our risk form, and that's associated with each risk. So if you have a risk, you can open up the risk information dialog box, and in the risk form, by default, we have a cost of risk calculation. That includes the potential loss. Well, how much would it cost if it goes times probability, and you get your expected loss. Then it will take into the cost of mitigation plans that are being assigned to that risk in the mitigation waterfall plot. And then it can take into account, then we get a cost of post-mitigated risk. Then we could assign even a response plan to that. And what happens is we end up at the end getting a savings from the mitigation. Now, if it's positive, then it probably makes sense for you to go forward with that. If it's negative, then you know that actually your reaction to that risk event possibly happening is going to cost more. So you might want to rethink about how that works. So mitigation plans can be entered into the mitigation and response view. And in this one, you can see that we've sort of created an overarching or a summary plan. Then we have activities or mitigation, smaller sub mitigation activities. They're flagged there. They have a cost, and they can be assigned to a risk, and they can have probability and impacts. And this is where the the assignment generally takes place in the mitigation waterfall plot. So once we've added them into the mitigation response view, which is our recommended practice, we can then enter them add them to the mitigation waterfall plot, and then add the dates and the changes to probability and impact. It will pick up the score. It will pick up the costs. And if you've added an owner or a person responsible, we'll pick that up. And then we can build this waterfall plot. Just to let you know that it is possible to go the other way if we add our mitigation plans in the waterfall plot. They will end up in here, and we can add some more data here if we want to. So that integration goes both ways. Now, one of the things that we've done in version 7.2 is we've added mitigation plans or linked to the schedule. So what that means is that once we've created our mitigation strategy for a risk, we have those activities that are in there. We can actually add them into the schedule. So they will just be activities in the schedule. But at this point, once we've added them here, when they're going to occur, the dates, durations, costs of them, we can link them to a mitigation plan. And so what actually happens there is that mitigation plans, instead of adding that data in the mitigation plans, it will inherit it from the activities. So there's a direct link between the two. And what that does is not only picks up the start dates and finish dates, but it will also pick up the actuals. It will pick up the actual start and finish times. It will pick up the actual durations of it. It will also pick up the actual costs. as opposed to the planned costs, all which can be used as part of our reporting and tracking. And that data can then go across, and we'll look at this slightly. This is a new view that we put in to overcome, to add a bit more capability on reporting, tracking and reporting mitigations. It's called the mitigation assignment view. It will be added here, and then go into the waterfall plot. So it all, we can add this, goes in here, we can see it in here, and obviously we can see it in here, or the mitigation plan, mitigation response view, and then it gets updated in the waterfall plot. So this has added a much more, what we would call, quantitative aspect to the analysis of your mitigation plans, because they actually are linked to actual project schedule and project costs. Now, one of the things we're going to look at, also quickly, we won't spend very much time on this, is the assign two new views that we've added in, that were came out of some requirements to add additional data to both the mitigation plans and also to updating risks. Now, what this does is it allows a lot more fields, and addresses some of the might be shortcomings or limited capabilities that we had in traditional or the previous versions, where the mitigation response or the waterfall didn't have enough capability to expand how they worked, and in terms of the data, in terms of the ability to export the data out or import the data out. So we've added these two new views. They're much more customizable. They have ability to track quite a bit more data, as opposed to the existing views, which were the risk history and the mitigation waterfall chart, and the mitigation response views. They were somewhat limited, or they were constrained by what they were doing at the time. So we added these two views to expand the ability, to track the data or import the data from third-party sources, and to be able to report and export it back out of the system. Finally, we'll look at response plans. If you've not used them before, we'll just do a quick overview of how they are and how they would be put on at the end of the session, end of the risk planning. And we've got our plan in place, and we're now going to have use our residual risk. We've brought it down. Now we can take a response plan with a single probability and a cost and schedule impacts on it, and that will be our response plan. We can assign that to the schedule as well. So let's take a quick look at how we've implemented this in the software. So we have a very simple example here. We actually we've got our risks loaded in the system. You can see that it's got pre and post mitigated. We do actually have a schedule already put in, so to speed things up. But the reality is this is still sort of qualitative, because we haven't implemented these changes. Now, one of the things is, I'll just want to go through it before we start on that, is the two new views that we have. This is the assign mitigation plan to risk and the risk status. Now, let's just, the reason why, again, that we looked at it is, if you look at the waterfall diagram, we needed an ability to be able to import more data and maybe export it out rather than just report on it. And one of the problems is that that we came across is this is all hard coded, and it's limited space, and we have certain things that we do want to include in it, including the columns that we have and the waterfall plot, and we're not able to. Um, we weren't able to we add additional columns or and we looked at the usability, and we would have to do a lot of scrolling if you had a lot more data. And one of the things that doesn't come across is that we have probability, which is the same for but we only have a single impact, and that is basically the overall impact of a risk, which combines all of the impacts of a multiple risk category, like cost, schedule. It could be some other technical, reputational, whatever they are. We don't, we're not able to, we didn't have them in there. So we just had it rolled up, and so we didn't track that in the system. It could be actually in the risk register, but in this particular view, it wasn't here. So the decision was made to create a much more user-friendly, customizable interface that would append that or support some of that data. And if you look here, one of the things is if we go into here, we can see that we actually have a lot more data that we can add to the track in this view. And you can see for the mitigation plans, not only do we just have the score, but we have the probabilities, and we can add changes to specific risk categories. So we can track that, update it, and this allows us to export the data as using our export to Microsoft Excel. So if we want to pull the data out to put in another system, but we can also, if the data is coming in from a third party, we can import it as part of this capability. So we've had the import risk before, and now we have the import mitigation and response plan. So we have updates. And it also will look at it, the import risk status. So we have a lot more interoperability or integration that we can move the data in and out, and a lot more flexibility. The same thing with if we look at it and we go to the risk history, let's go there, activate it. The risk history, again, it's hard coded. Captures only a specific set of data that we had, and it only captures the impact across for one for all of the categories. So the request was made that we needed a bit more flexibility, have more data about the history. So we did the same thing. We'll go back out, and on the risk status, it does the same sort of thing. It has a lot more columns that we can, again, add to the system, actuals, planned, all of these different categories can be added. So we have much more flexible interface, and it does support both the import and export functions. So we can pull the data in from other sources, or we can export it back out. So we've got that. Just covered that explanation. So if you do wondering about what you then, you haven't looked at either any of our videos on it or the documentation, that's really what those two views are supporting. So we've looked at this. We have the risk right here. Now what we want to do is to make it a bit more quantitative and build in the mitigation plans, our risk plans, into the system. Because these should represent both activities that are going to take place that incur, will have maybe resources associated with it, and schedule implications and costs. what we've done, what we can do now is we can create we have our schedule, but we've added these risk mitigation activities for that particular risk. Could be also more. Again, they're going to have durations, start and finish times. They have costs associated, and this is a combination of a resource cost and a fixed cost. Those costs could obviously also have risk associated with them. And in the mitigation and response view, we can link that data directly to those. So we're not just entering it in because we think that's what it's going to be. We can now bring that in. It'll be part of our analysis, or quantitative analysis. So we double click, and in the properties, you can start to see the schedule here. And the reason I put them at the top is just it's much easier. If you have a very big schedule, you're going to be going, you can be going down. And I'm just going to click that. And what it does is it picks up that cost. Now, it's run a bit of an analysis. We have, there was some uncertainties on the cost, which I didn't show, but that's why it's doing. But it's pulling that directly from the activity. We can do that for all three. So now we've got a direct link between our risk register, our mitigation plans, and our project schedule, the mitigation plans and the project schedule. And so if those shift, the plan versus the actuals, all of that's going to get tracked in the system. And it provides us a lot more granularity into the system. And we sort of, at that point, if we want to, we could run a schedule and see what we have in terms of analysis, looking at our cost. Now, one of the things that this does is that we are still actually looking at one of the things it's still looking at post mitigation. So we've built in the costs of the mitigation plans and the duration, so it's part of the system right now. What we haven't done is we haven't reduced the impact. So if we wanted to look at what the results of the end result of the mitigation, we could create a plan. I will do it just in here quickly. And you could go in to the drag and drop risk, and we have this requirement changes, and we go in and select all of the risks that's associated with that. Which would be these. Typically, I might have a identifier in the drag and drop, so we would do that. Or we could replace it with a response plan, a single response plan. It really simplifies it. And here's we can have a response plan, which I've added. So it's going to when we've done it, the response, if that risk still occurs, it's going to be 15 days. It's going to cost us $4,000. Now, one of the things we can do it adding it qualitatively and quantitatively to the analysis. For the qualitative, in the risk form, when we're looking at the cost of risk, again, so we have a potential loss that from the Monte Carlo simulations, expected loss. We have the cost of mitigation from the waterfall tab. And so we've got an expected savings. There's the total cost of risk mitigation. But we might want to add in that response plan. So we're going to say, well, these are the, we're going to, if that does risk occur, this is what we are going to have this requirement updated response plan. So I'm going to update the role requirements due to that. And so that should, if we get in there, yes. And it does get added into the system. And really, the response plan is actually the cost of the residual risk, because that's overcoming it. So that's what we're going. We can see the probability, the expected loss now is $400, and total cost of risk with mitigation. So we've actually, looks like we've got a fairly solid plan in place. So we've done that. So what should we do now to add it quantitatively? Well, we're going to add it as an assignment. Now, the way that we can do that is if we go to the risk assignments. One thing we can just actually just to go back up. Now, after elaboration, review, I want to add that on activity 27. So I'll go back to, and so that is activity 27 right here. So what we want to do is I'm going to go in here, and I can do this in any of them. I'm going to say execute response plan. And you'll see, and they'll say, okay, what is that? Well, which response plan? Because you could have multiple in the system. And we're going to go requirement right there. And you can see that all the probability and outcomes have disappeared there because of that. Now, what we're going to do, because we've got this response plan, we don't actually have to have, and this will be 10%. That would be our final probability of it occurring. And the rest of these we're just going to delete because this is over basically taking into account what would happen after that. So we don't need to have these assignments in here anymore. So we'll just go through there. And it's going to go down. Quickly scroll down and we can just delete all of those. So what we have now is we've put in place the plans. We've reduced the risk based on what our plan is. So this would be considered a post-mitigated plan, and we can calculate that. And then we can go into our project summary and see what's happening at the list. And you can see it's changed quite a bit because we reduced that risk. So a lot of this is now being driven by the schedule and cost uncertainty that we have. And we have one risk event here that we haven't mitigated yet. We can do that there. And I'll just turn off that baseline. Okay, so now we have that. So this is our mitigated. This could be our mitigated plan going forward. Now, again, there are some decisions that you might make. Are we going to? This is what we think are typically what we're going to use. This is to actually develop our cost and schedule, margins, and contingency. It may be that once the project gets executed, you're going to go through and use a non-mitigated, and as it gets executed properly and you have actuals, it will burn down. But this is what we'll do to develop our cost and schedule contingencies. Final step you might want to look at is there could be multiple different mitigation strategies. And what I've just done, if you haven't looked at this before, I just added it to the system, is we have in the system now, we have multiple, we've looked at multiple scenarios that we can build this into the system. Depending on which one we have, this is a fully mitigated, and we can put here, and we can look at this. Again, this is a way of looking at the system because we've done the mitigation planning. The next step on that can be looking at different scenarios, and one of them is looking at that I've done in the system in this for this example is just having one that's we're going to mitigate it with multiple activities, but we're going to and have less uncertainty, and then you know we've shortened, sort of abbreviated the mitigation steps, but added more schedule uncertainty to the activities just to see what would happen. And we get this mitigation coming out of the mitigations. And this would be one of the things we could go in and say, okay, we've gone through our mitigations, we've created them, and you can create different baselines using the same data and slightly change it. And you can come up with a scenario analysis. So I just thought as an endpoint on this, we just add that it also, once we've got this quantitative capability for our mitigation, we can also build this in and start to look at doing the scenario analysis, which is a little bit out of scope for this webinar, but I thought I would end off on that. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending our webinar. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact us. The webinar itself has been recorded and will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel within the next 48 hours.